Waiting for Patrick. And we're live. Hello and welcome to another author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles and I'm delighted to have two of my favorite authors with us tonight, New York Times best-selling Susan Elizabeth Phillips and Jenn McKinlay. Before we begin tonight, I want to let those tuning in virtually know we do have a limited number of signed copies of both authors' books. So if you're looking for a gift for the special someone in your life or just a gift for yourself, as soon as you're done watching this program, go online and order a copy because they will not last long. And now I'd like to welcome Susan Elizabeth Phillips and Jenn McKinlay.
Hi, John.
Susan. My first question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Susan, is tell us a little bit about yourself before you became a writer, because if my research is correct, neither of you intended to be writers.
No, I wanted to be a movie star, and this is my backup career. I had a degree in speech and drama and a minor in English, and I taught high school for a while until I was pregnant with our first child. And then I was a stay-at-home mom and started writing with a friend just to have something fun to do while we were raising children. So that's how it all started. It was an accidental career, but based on the fact that I had been a huge reader since second grade, Mrs. Martin's Class, The Boxcar Children. That book had hooked me from being 7 years old on, and was just a huge reader. So that was my training to be a writer, just definitely as a reader.
What about you, Jenn?
I did know I wanted to be a writer, but I did love theater, and I had a moment where I was like, oh, I want to be famous, and I think I was more a singer. I wanted to be a singer. I won't. You're welcome. But I also realized, just because you have a knack doesn't necessarily mean you're any good at it. So I had to pivot, and I think I don't know, I was a teenager and I saw the movie Romancing the Stone. Everybody see that? Yeah. And this is where you're like, duh. I didn't realize writing was a career. Like, people do that I thought books just showed up formed. I don't know. So I saw that movie and it stuck in my head for like 10 years. But when I got to college, I was an English major, and I was like, well, that requires a lot of reading of things I don't like, which is problematic. So I pivoted to library science, knowing that at least I'd be working with books, right? And I would chase the dream as a side hustle. And then, finally, I think my oldest son, who is here in the back, was fresh out of the oven when I got the call. And I had gotten married and had a kid, and I had submitted 1 million books and been rejected and kind of forgot about it because kid. And the phone call came from Harlequin, and the woman said, hi, this is Wanda Ottewell, and we want to buy your book. And I was like, what book? And she said, usually people scream about now. And I was like, well, I like the baby. And that was kind of how that started.
John, there are people standing in the back. We have 2 seats here, and we have 1 seat there. If you have an empty seat next to you, would you hold up your hand? Come on up. You don't have to stay back there.
Susan doesn't bite unless you ask her.
No. If you're closer, I can make fun of you. That's why I want you up here. This is school teacher syndrome.
I can sense that.
Come on, up here.
Crowd management.
Right now. Let's go. Let's go. Here.
How soon I lost control of things.
Shocking.
Right here,
Shocking.
ladies. 2, right here.
She's not going to stop until you come up, so give in.
Well, we're glad you finally made it.
Okay, Susan.
Okay.
You
You're
wrote,
the one who put the Prosecco out, John.
I know.
It wasn't me.
I have no one to blame but myself. But let's try to bring it back to the topic at hand. You wrote a book with a friend. You wrote a couple more books. And then you wrote a book called It Had to Be You. How does someone who is at best have a nonchalant relationship with professional sports decide I want to write about a football player?
I thought you were going to say who is at best mediocre. I don't know I started, the very first book I wrote was a historical romance I wrote in collaboration with a neighbor. We were both home with small kids, and this is a book that is long out of print, but we had so much fun writing this book. We would go to whatever person's kitchen had the dinner that was going to take the longest to prepare, and we'd talk about what scene we needed to have right next, and then Claire would go off and she'd do a rough draft, and then she'd give it to me, and I would either throw it completely out or I would just touch it up. And we had about 125 pages of this written when we had an editor at Dell Publishing contact us 3 weeks after she received these pages from someone else and said, we've read this, we like it, and we're going to make you an offer. I know. This reinforces the idea you have to know someone to get published, but it's not true. What happened was we knew somebody, and that's how we got read quickly. And also, the market was so hot for historical romance then. This was like 1981, 82. And then my co-writer went to law school. She left, and I was on my own, wrote another historical. And then I really wanted to experiment with contemporary voice. So I wrote my first big book, which was Glitter Baby. I did 3 of the big books, one of which was Fancy Pants, I keep going blank on the date of that book. I think it was 93 or something, or 89, something like that. It was the 80s or 90s. And that was the first sports romance. That was the Texas Good Old Boy Golf Pro. In terms of the Chicago Stars books, I just had this idea. What would it be like if a woman who knew nothing about sports inherited a professional football team? And it just made me laugh. But I didn't intend to write a series. I wrote that book, and in that book, a wide receiver out of Tularosa, Texas, named Bobby Tom Denton comes in. And he was so arrogant and ridiculous, I had to write his story. That was Heaven, Texas. Still, no series. I go on and write something else. And it just kind of went that way. But the turning point was, so It Had to Be You was one turning point. And actually, the way that book hit, because my career was on a downhill trajectory, the way that book hit was we had a Romance Writers of America conference come up, and my agent said to the publisher, give away 1,000 copies of It Had to Be You at RWA. And this was before anybody was giving away free books. That was it. Yeah.
You were actively discouraged from writing about sports figures, weren't you? That was like a taboo.
I was not actively discouraged because I didn't know there was a rule. Okay. The rule was you weren't allowed to write about athletes, rock stars, or actors. But I wasn't part of, this I think was coming from Harlequin, I wasn't part of that group of writers. I didn't know there was a rule. So I was writing in ignorance and didn't find out about it later. John, I speculate that rule came because Harlequin is an international publisher, and I think they thought that if you wrote about sports, it wouldn't be bought up by an international audience, yeah. But since then, I've written about athletes, rock stars, and actors. And so have a lot of other writers.
Which brings us to your latest book in the Chicago series, Simply the Best. What do you want people to know about the book who have not read it?
It's really good. You should read it. It is the story of the hero is this shark of a superstar sports agent. Winner takes all. Failure is not an option. This guy is ruthless, and he's frankly kind of an ass. Please, oh, darn it, I wasn't supposed to say that when you were broadcasting.
That's all right.
And the heroine is Rory Garrett. She's a failed chocolatier, and she is also the older sister of her younger brother is a super successful quarterback. He's always been good at everything. She's been in his shadow, and he also is the agent's most important client. So it does not go well between them. It's a love story, but it's also a story about success and failure and those bigger themes. What price do we pay to be simply the best?
There's also a dead body in there, too.
There is a dead body. Hey, I pulled that off, didn't I?
You did.
And writing suspense is not my forte.
Which brings us to Jenn. You switched from...
Very good at killing.
Yeah, you switched from romance to killing people. How did that...
For me, personally? Public servants. John and I joke that we're recovering librarians. And I think when you do 22 years for me, I don't know how long you did,
25.
but 25, you have a list. Yeah, you know. So I work through things.
Oh boy, this is getting dangerous.
But yeah, so no, mysteries actually. I wanted to be a romance writer. I wanted to be a romantic comedy writer, and that's where I started. And then it didn't go very well. And again, Harlequin had their way, and I didn't really fit. Square peg, square peg. So my husband actually said, "Why don't?" Because I love all genre. I love fantasy. I love romance. I love mysteries. I'm not really a literary reader, but although I have found some books lately that I love. So my husband said, "Why don't you write a mystery?" And I was like, "Oh man, you have to be like really smart. You have to have like red herrings and suspects and a murder." And then I started writing it because he also said, wise man, when I couldn't wrap my head around it, he's like, "Why don't you write it backwards?"
Oh,
Right?
that's really weird.
Smart guy. He's in the back.
Really?
He's weird, but it was because I wasn't a plotter. I was a pantser,
Mm-hmm.
but this was a way of getting me to plot. And I was like, oh. So then I wrote the mysteries, and then they sold, and now I'm writing romantic comedies again. So
Do you still write backwards when you do a mystery, or was that just to get you going?
I think it was mostly to get me going, but it was mostly kind of like writer accountability, you know, because the beauty of a dead body, as you've discovered, it really moves a plot along.
Yeah, I know.
Isn't it lovely?
Yeah, it does.
All that authentic emotional stuff, who cares?
Yeah.
We got a dead body. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But for me, it was actually, when I used to write the romantic comedies, when I started, I would have the blank page. Have you ever had a blank page? It's awful.
Awful.
And I realized I needed a plot. I needed to know, who the suspects were, how the person got murdered, who got murdered. And then weirdly, I've probably written, 50 mysteries about now? I've stopped plotting. I've started pantsing them.
From the beginning.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I always know my opening line, but this last one that I wrote is the next one that comes after this one, and I stopped plotting halfway through, and then I was on deadline. I had to crank it out over Christmas in a month, like 30,000 words or whatever.
Remember, you're on the internet. Your editor's listening. So. She worked very hard for months.
But it was weird, and Reese Bowen is a mystery writer, and she's a pantser for mysteries, and I was just like, oh no, you do that, that's crazy. And a friend of mine here is also a pantser, Paige Shelton, and I was like, why do you guys do that? And they said, well, if I knew who the murderer was, it wouldn't be interesting to write.
Right.
And so this last book that I wrote, all of a sudden I had these wicked twists because I didn't know what I was doing. And it was just like, oh, I get it.
Is that Fatal First Edition?
No, that one was pretty plotted out, but I can't remember the title. A Merry Little Murder Plot? Yeah, the next one after this one.
Well, tell us about Fatal First Edition.
There's a train. Fatal First Edition is kind of my homage to Murder on the Orient Express and Strangers on a Train. So there's a little bit of both, although not nearly as, like really Highsmith and Christie. And then me. But I just love train travel, and I love the idea of a murder on a train. So it was, I've killed a lot of people at this point in a lot of ways. So it was like, what are we going to do that's different? And in this book also, I have another writing friend, Kate Carlisle, if you all know her. She writes the Bibliophile Mystery Series, which is a bookbinder. The woman is a professional bookbinder, and I thought after so many books, we've both had about 15, 16, whatever books, I said our characters have to meet. So my librarians go to a conference in Chicago where Brooklyn, Kate's main character, is giving a talk. So they got to do a cameo. And the best part about that is I spent a year telling Kate I was going to kill her characters off. Could be why she's not talking to me now, but no.
Susan, you have said that when you're writing your books, you need to find an occupation where the hero and the heroine can spend a lot of time together. What made you choose a chocolatier?
I don't remember. If you're going to do a romance, you've got to keep the characters together, right? So I I think I'd had the idea for a chocolatier for quite a while, which is interesting because I like cheap milk chocolate. Really exquisite chocolates are not my thing. I'm like a caramel person. So really, when I did a lot of that research, it wasn't making me run to the refrigerator every few minutes, which was always good. But I don't remember why I chose chocolatier. Yeah. John, do you have another question for me?
I do have another question. I'll just add that Susan is available for product placement. So if Godiva or Hershey's are listening to this, feel free to send the samples to the Poison Pen, and we'll get them to Susan.
Really, you will.
Yeah, really. Okay, let's take an easy question for both of you because it's Valentine's Day.
And because I'm blowing
Susan's
at this end.
Susan's already had 2 glasses of Prosecco. So, what are the romances that made you fall in love with the genre as a reader?
With me, it were the historical bodice rippers of the late 1970s and 80s. When I use the term bodice rippers, that's a very specific subgenre of romance, and these were the historical romances where you had the virginal heroine and you had the strong, burly, truly over alpha hero. And we did have some rape and pillage in those books, which younger readers have a very, very hard time understanding those books. I mean, they don't age well for them. But I understand, I think, really clearly what the appeal of those books is now, or what the appeal was then, that we now find offensive. And that was, for those of us raised in the 50s, good girls couldn't. Good girls didn't. So the only way you could have sex was if it was going to be against your will. And so it had to be against your will, but you had to kind of enjoy it, so it had to be a hunky hero. And so with those books, what was really fascinating about them was the heroines were pretty wimpy, right? They didn't have a lot of skills. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of knowledge. The hero had all those things. But by the end of the book, she had brought him to his knees. And we have the rise of the feminist movement and those books happening at exactly the same time, and I don't think it was accidental at all. So those were the books which I probably would not enjoy now, but that I loved then when they came out. Kathleen Woodiwiss and Rosemary Rogers and Joanna Lindsay's early books, all of those.
What about you, Jen?
I agree. I was a little bit behind those, but I think for me, the other thing I always feel with romance that is misunderstood, and I don't think this has changed, and this was my take on those books, women are exhausted. We're just tired, and if the dude wants to do all the work, I'm okay with that. And I think you had women that were, they were entering the workforce, but they still had to do the dinner and host his work people and be pretty. That one still lingered, doesn't it? And I think women were just like, they could pick up a novel and there was suddenly rich guy, hot guy, smart guy, hopefully, smart guy, and then he did all the work in the bedroom. Woo!
That is really interesting. I think you're onto something there.
Well, I think we're tired.
Yeah.
Or they were then too.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the author, like I read a lot of those, and I loved them. But the one author that, like, I'd probably keel over dead if I met her, is Loretta Chase. And the absolute most wonderful historical romance to me.
Let me finish your sentence. Lord of Scoundrels.
Close. Mr. Impossible. Is it Impossible?
Lord Imperfect, yeah, Mr. Impossible.
Really?
Mr. Impossible. It's the one where they go to the Egypt and they're looking for her.
Yeah.
She's really smart and he's like a big doofus. Yes, and I love it so much. Like she can do hieroglyphics and he's just this big lumpkin, but he has this. He's just there to protect her, and he's
a golden retriever.
He is, and I love him.
Which is not a bad thing.
But what I love is she's really smart, and there's a couple of scenes where, she's divorced. No, she's widowed. And the thing I loved about it that really resonated is he says to her at one point when she's talking about, because she's really smart, and this is, of course, historical, and her previous husband, who had died, tried to diminish her her mental abilities because she was figuring out hieroglyphics. And she's talking to the hero about, this husband, and she says, well, do you think I'm too manly? Do you think I'm too, because, I'm smart? And he says something to the effect of, he must have been a very small man, otherwise he wouldn't have needed to chop you down to size. And that just stays with me. It's my favorite book ever, sorry. It's my comfort read.
Well, let me put in, as long as we're talking about Loretta Chase's books, let me put in a plug for Lord of Scoundrels, yes, which was one of her really, really early books. And it is talk about the grumpy hero and the feisty, strong heroine. She just pulled it off beautifully. I love that book.
Yeah.
Susan, you talked about your love of historicals, and usually they feature dukes and all these important figures. Are sports figures today kind of their modern counterpart?
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking, if you want to create the alpha hero, what do you have? You've got the detective, the cowboy. You've got those archetypes to play with, and because there were so many books like that, I think when I originally started writing the sports book, I just thought, well, the athlete is another one of those archetypes, but nobody's played with it that much. Plus, I could play with the whole idea of the dumb jock, which I love being able to play with that. So I think it definitely is it's the Duke, but for contemporary books, yeah.
I do have a question for you, Jenn, because your new book, Fatal First Edition, is set on a train. Mm-hmm. You talk about movies and books, Patricia Highsmith's book in particular, and one scene in there, the characters are going on about which is better, the movie or the book.
Right.
So I told you, I gave you an assignment. And of course you totally, no, but now I'm going to make you do it. Give us some examples. Books better than movies they're made of, movies that are better than the books.
Books that are better than the movies.
To start you off?
No, I remember that one because it's in the book. Die Hard was a book first.
Really?
Nobody knows that. It was a book first. So that is, I think, the movies. But Alan Rickman, come on. It's never going to get better. And Bruce Willis. So that's one where the book was, I think, worse than the movie. Here's one, and I don't want to get in trouble with the Die Hards, or I should say the Twihards. But I read Twilight. Enough said. And I went to see the movie. Because I was a teen librarian at the time, and the teens were we had a Twilight prom. We fully embraced the Twilight era. That was one where I really thought the movie
did a better job.
No, I thought the movie could have been better than the book. I'm like, it's a really good, it would have been a great screenplay. Like, there's a lot here to work with. And then the movie was exactly like the book. Okay, so that would be one where
they're both bad. Okay.
Well, just not my thing, but you know what I mean. And then what's the other one where the
book
movies
is better than the movie, movie's better than the book.
Crawdads?
Oh, Crawdad. I never saw the movie. How was that?
I didn't. I read the book.
The book was
amazing.
amazing.
I think probably the book was better than the movie.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
I think
mostly books are better than
Harry
the
Potter and the books are so much better than the movie because the movies had to cut out so much. And I hate the idea that a lot of the kids now have only seen the movies. They haven't read those books.
Which are amazing.
Yeah.
I think one of the funniest author quotes, I met Charlene Harris way back in 2010. And I was a huge Sookie Stackhouse before people even knew who Sookie Stackhouse was. Anyway, because,
Librarian.
Right, librarian. Anyway, and I loved them. And then it became True Blood. Well, Skarsgård, we're done. We're good. I'm good. And I would say that's a situation where and this is, I thought, how she put it, I'm not looking for the HBO series to be like my book. It lives in a separate realm, Skarsgård realm. And she's like, but I also think it's made me a lot of money. And I thought that's how you have to look at it.
Look at Bridgerton. What a brilliant job they did adapting Julie's books. And, the books were there, and they respected the books and came up with this amazing series. I can't wait for the new series to start.
And they are very different. So they are they also live in a different kind of realm.
They do.
They did
and they're
change a
both
lot.
very satisfying.
Yes.
You both have written what we'll call series, though that has different meanings in mystery and romance. your Chicago Stars series, Susan, your many, many mystery series, Jen. What are the advantages as an author to writing connected books? Are there disadvantages? How do you keep everything straight? We'll start with you, Susan.
Oh, boy. I think because the Chicago Stars wasn't supposed to be a series, I never kept a record all the way through, and that has gotten me into so much trouble until I learned that, and if any of you are on my Facebook page, you know that if I'm writing a Stars book, I'll hop on Facebook and I'll say, who's reading such and such book now? Like, did Phoebe and Dan have a pool at their house? And I'm 5 minutes, somebody will come up with an answer. And I'm like, this is right. I should not have to do all the work here. The readers can do some work. And it is, when I write a Stars book, I am going back into familiar territory. On the other hand, it's like Bill said to me at one point, he says, Susan, you already have more quarterbacks than any team in the NFL. You cannot do another quarterback. And that kind of annoyed me. So I said, all right, for you, I'll do a backup quarterback. And that became the seed for When Stars Collide, where Thad Owens is Clint Garrett's backup. He's number 2, always number 2, and I hook him up with Olivia Shore, the opera singer, who is number 1. So once again, he's backup. So that was a fun thing to play with. But I get tired of it after a while.
Are you a fan of opera? Is that why you chose
No,
to
I knew
make it?
nothing about it.
So this is like your...
Emma.
Yes.
I know, I
Pick
love
something that you don't really like and make a career.
Yeah. There you go. I did listen to a lot of opera when I was writing that book, though. And some of it I loved and some of it I didn't. But no, I don't think we've had a lot of opera divas as heroines. And to put that, the opera, highbrow culture, lowbrow culture was just perfect. Yeah.
What about you, Jen? You've got 3 series, I think.
Yeah, I didn't realize they would go that long, so I didn't make a Bible either, which has been problematic, but good old Facebook. One of the characters in one of my series has 7 brothers, and I was at work, and I could not remember the names of the 7 brothers, so I hopped on, and I was like, all right, free book to the first person who tells me the names of all 7 brothers. Yep. 5 minutes.
Right there.
So yes, I do. I like having my secretaries or administrative assistants out there in social media land. It's wonderful. But no, series are great because you're going back to visit a place that you know with people you know that you care about, and you're invested in their individual stories and their families at this point. I know the families but you're also kind of constricted. So you can get a little bit of fatigue.
I have not been really constricted with the Stars book, except for the fact that I've been writing a lot of quarterbacks, because every book has a different landscape to it, and each book completely stands on its own. You can enter the Chicago Stars book at any point. And I haven't written children because I don't have good stories for them. So I have had that advantage with the series. But
So is it more like a continuity than a series, would you say?
absolutely. Yeah.
I like a good continuity.
Jen, you started out in romance, went to mystery, but you've come back to romance, and not a lot of people know about that, or you wish more people knew about that.
Ah, come on.
So what prompted you to decide, I'm tired of killing people, now I want to play matchmaker?
Well, rom-com was my preferred genre. That's what I always wanted to publish in. Mysteries I loved reading them, but I didn't really think, like I said before, I didn't think I had the brains for that. And I love fantasy too, but the world building is, very intimidating, very, very much intimidating. But when we call it the pub apocalypse, like 2016 happened, and it looked like all the mystery writers, the cozy writers, were going to get kicked to the curb, I panicked, as you do. And I went to New York. I went to my editor's office and I said, how are things in mysteries and cozies and editors? She's like, everything's fine. Yeah, it's never fine. And I was like, okay, hypothetically, if things were not fine, what else could I do? And, editors have their wall of books. So she turned around and she pulled a stack of books and she pushed them at me and she said, you could do that. Oh, the irony. It was romantic comedies. And I was like, okay. And I had to take the train home from New York to my mom's up in Connecticut, and the whole train ride, as my children were trying to take over the train, because whatever. My mom and I were like, okay, we'll make him a veterinarian. Perfect. Okay, where? And I'm like, Rhode Island. No, Maine. No. And by the time we got to New Haven, we had a pretty much a plot and an idea and a kernel of something that I could work with. So, and then I just stayed in both lanes. But then, I know I'm technically not supposed to say anything yet because the ink's not dry, but I'm going to go into
Spill.
yeah, right? Ooh, the tea. I'm going to be writing a fantasy series.
Wow.
A librarian
real
who can raise
publisher?
the dead. Yes, for a real publisher, same publisher. And so it'll be a mystery, rom-com, and a fantasy.
Wow.
I know, fun. So we'll see.
Both of you have been around the block, so to speak, when it comes to writing.
Oh boy, have I been around the block.
What has surprised you the most about the business of publishing? What do you wish someone had told you, Susan, when you were starting out? You need to know this. This will help you with your career.
I'm glad I was writing in ignorance, really, and just focusing on the books. I was really fortunate. I had a husband who had a job, and no matter what I did, whether it worked or failed, the kids were going to get fed. We had a roof over our head, and not all writers have that. I'm very, very aware that that was a huge blessing for me. But what has been fascinating about my career, because my first book was published in 1983, is that I have seen probably more changes in the course of my career than happened since the Gutenberg Bible on. There were no e-books. Originally, we were collecting email address or street addresses, so we had newsletters. Audio wasn't a big thing, and romance was either historical or contemporary. The other thing I've seen all the technological changes, the way we can interact with readers on social media, but I think that the other thing that's been interesting is watching the way the public's view of romance has changed. Because when I started, there was a lot of snobism, but what has happened since then is because romance covers everything from, we got dragons, we've got social issue books. I mean, it is such a broad genre that anybody who's a reader, it's almost impossible for them to have avoided reading a romance. So a lot of that buzz has really, really died down over the years.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Jen?
I wish someone had said run. It's not what you think it is. For me, I came later to the game. I came in the early 2000s. And it just, it's like you have a dream and you work to that dream and you have this idea that you're going to be living in a really big house on the side of Camelback. And then you're not. It's like, it cracks me up. It's like, my husband's a musician, so we're just an arty family. And I remember this is totally off topic, but I'm going for it. We were at one of his gigs, and one of the local pretty famous musicians is standing outside the club as they're loading in their gear, and he pauses, and he's a little bit older than us, and he was just like, yeah, my life is so glamorous. I mean, they were loading into a redone Sizzler. It was just like, yeah, you have this dream that you think it's going to be all this, but what you don't realize is you actually have to get up every day and, right. And then there's copy edits, and then there's, cover art, and then there's revisions, and then your readership especially when you have a long-running series, they have expectations, and you have kind of an unspoken understanding of each other. And I didn't understand any of those things when I started writing. I just thought you write a book, it goes out into the world, you see it on the shelf, you feel great about yourself, you cash the check, you go home, rinse, repeat. Well, no, there's just a lot more. And with the rise of social media and stuff, we talked about how great it is to just reach the readers, but the readers have certain, how's Henry your cat? And it's just like, oh, he's great. Why do you know all this about me? Oh, I put that out there. It's like the lines are blurry, and and sometimes it's a little, off-putting. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? My other thing that you were talking about romance and how the perception of it's changed. One of the things I always thought about romance too, and why I'm so glad it is evolving and it is being more embraced, is that for me, a romance is never between a woman and a man, or a woman and a woman, or a man and a man, or whatever your romantic story is about. It's really about the person and themselves. Because for me, a romance, a really well-written, beautiful romance, is that you've got a flawed person in the beginning, maybe flawed people both, and at the end of it, they like themselves. And I think that, to me, has always been the attraction of romance.
Absolutely. I want that character growth. Mm-hmm. I want to see the heroine and the hero's journey.
Yes.
for sure. Yeah.
I think you're kind of paraphrasing RuPaul, who says, how the heck can you love someone else until you love yourself?
Very true.
Before we go to questions from the audience, if you'd like, because I know, Susan, with you, it's like dragging you behind a mule cart. Do you want to tell us anything about what's coming next? Can we hope for another book?
I actually, usually I just say no, but in this
Prosecco.
case, it's pretty obvious what's coming next. In When Stars Collide, the hero he's the backup quarterback for Clint Garrett, who's the young, feisty, studly quarterback. And I knew when I introduced him I was going to have to do a story, but by the time I was done with When Stars Collide, he was still too young in my mind to have his own story. So that's why I thought about what would it be like if you're the sister of this god of football. And that was the route for Simply the Best. But, the time has come. Clint is, I'm working on his own story right now. It sucks so bad, I cannot even tell you. Oh, I'm having such a hard time with it because I have no dead body. And I was whining to Jane Ann Krentz about this, and Jane says, Susan, you put a murder, it gives you a structure, right? And she said, it's never too late for a murder. I said, well, I'm on page 255. She said, okay, maybe that's too late. By the way, we have, I don't know who else is in the audience, but we have an illustrious guest today. We have Christina Dodd's daughter, Arwen. Wave at everybody. I was with Christina last night in Seattle, and just a little brief commercial because the book's not coming out yet. She has written this book called The Fair Daughter of Verona. And are you ready? It is the story of Romeo and Juliet's daughter. And Christina has tapped into her comic voice in this, plus you've still got a mystery. It is so much fun, and I like to believe the book wouldn't have been written if it weren't for Jane and me telling her how fantastic it was, although, Arwen, you might have been cheering her on, too. So, a digression there.
No, that's actually a good point, because Christina will be here next month for her book, Every Single Secret, which is fabulous, and her next book comes in July. And this is a commercial message. It's not too early to reserve your copy. So when you're done here, stop by the counter, put your name in. Christina would love to sign books for you. She'll be March 5th. Thank you, because my memory's shot. That was Susan. Okay, what's next for you, Jen? Because we can also do pre-orders for your books.
Yes. After this one, in
Library Book Lover, something. Lover, another book.
Love It, first book.
There you go.
So it's it's if you read Summer Reading, which came out, I see people know. There's a character in Summer Reading who's named Emily, and she's a hypochondriac and a librarian. Yeah, right what you know. So she has always dreamed of a bigger life, so she takes a job working for the author that was pivotal to her when she was a young teen in a very dysfunctional home. And that author is in Ireland and wrote a YA series that just meant everything to Emily. But half of her job is also working in the author's son's bookstore, and he does not want her there. So as she's assisting this author to finally finish, like picture Harry Potter without the last book. That's kind of what this is for this author. And she's trying to help her, and the son doesn't want her there, and it's in Ireland, and I went on a trip there, and it was awesome, and everybody should go, and Guinness is amazing. But it's kind of a love story to Ireland, so and a rom-com. Like she learns how to drive in Ireland, and I actually did that.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And the night before I was going to drive my mother, my college roommate, and her daughter, who was the flower girl at my wedding, women trip. I was laying in bed while they all slept after a hearty pub crawl, and I was like, I'm going to get us all killed. Oh, my God. But obviously I did not. But anyway, so that's all written into the book because it was ridiculous and fun. After that is then the next cupcake mystery.
Christmas one?
No, this one is a summer one with football players. It's called Fatal Fondant, and 2 football players buy a cupcake bakery franchise. So it was super fun, and the cover's awesome. But anyway, yeah. And then there's a Christmas mystery.
Ask Susan where she got her football chocolates, because that would tie in perfectly with the book.
Yeah.
Those football chocolates are really good. They're on the take some home. Yeah,
I will check them out.
It's a private candy maker. Although I did find her through Amazon, I have to say. But life is not perfect.
Why don't we stop and take some questions from our audience? Patrick, if you have any online questions, now's your chance. I've stunned you all into silence.
Yes. Oh, I'm not prolific. 2 years for a book.
No, but I mean, you've written many books.
Oh, yeah. Over many years, right?
Does the time for editing get better the more books you write, or is it still a trial, or how does the editing process work?
I love to revise. I hate a blank screen. It makes me anxious, and it makes me doubt myself. Once I have pages, I am really comfortable. I trust myself as an editor. So I like that part. I like revisions. A lot of authors do not.
Yeah. How often do you revise your work before you turn it in?
Well, I get an idea, and I sit down and I go chapter 1, and I start writing, and I get halfway through, and I go back to the beginning, and I redo that, and then I get to chapter 2. By the time I'm halfway through chapter 2, I realize chapter 1 is wrong, and I go back and start there, and then finish 2. It's a terrible, terrible process. By the time the book is done, after 2 years, when I finally am at the end, it's in pretty good shape because I'm constantly revising. I can't, what would be great is to be one of those writers who could just plow through and write a bad, rough draft and then go back and fix it. But I approach everything, my background's in theater, it's not in literature, and I approach everything internally. And sometimes, I cannot make characters do things. I mean, I can do it. I can make characters do things that aren't part of their real personality, but I have to go back and fix that. So everything is kind of growing organically, and it's just a mess. It's a messy process. I do not recommend it.
Wow. See, run. I write page 1 to the very last page, and then I read it once, and then I send it in.
She is not a nice person to be talking about that in front of me.
She's not going to be my friend now.
No. Other questions? Which ones?
This is for Jenn. You have different series. How do you keep the people straight in your mind?
Good question. Luckily, the settings are all pretty different. Like, one is set in Connecticut, where I was a librarian, where I started my career, and then one is set here in Scottsdale, where I live now, and then one is in London. So the settings usually are pretty good. And luckily, there are copy editors. So, like, when I was writing a cupcake book and suddenly Lindsay was a cupcake baker instead of a librarian, the copy editor was like, hello! And I was like, oh, my bad. But so I have help. But I think the settings are what helps me the most. When you're writing Notting Hill, it's so vastly different than Scottsdale, Arizona. So that keeps me on point.
Other questions? Way towards the back.
My name's Alexis. I have a question. Who's your favorite, or do you think about a couple in the Chicago Stars that you love the most?
This is just such a trite answer, but whatever couple in the book I just finished, I love the most. Whatever couple in the book I'm working on, I can't stand them. That's really the true answer. But I think fondly back on some of those early couples. Kevin and Molly and Dan and Phoebe, and they're doing really well. I'm sure they want you to know that everything's going really well with them.
Patrick, did you have some?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions for the online viewers. The first one is simply, do you like football?
Oh, do I like football? I do. Yeah, I do like football. It's toward the end of the season. When the Bears are playing in the beginning, that was just torture, and I left. I'll let Bill watch those and tell me afterward. But from the AFC, leading up to the AFC and NFC championship games, I was there. Yep. But I don't like other sports.
Okay, related question. It says, Susan, some sports figures live personal lives which push the envelope. Your characters push envelopes. Do you think actual players today reflect your characters? Or maybe do your characters reflect actual players?
Let me just say to that, Travis and Taylor, I was way ahead of you two.
Here's a question for both of you about your audiobooks. Do you like them? Are you happy
Involved
with them?
I mean, they have us like I have to listen to 3 people audition. And I will say one of the books I only have one where I've come from the male perspective, and the guy that did it, I was like listening to it and I'm like, I need a fan and a bucket of ice. Woo! Yeah, they audition and then you pick them and then you hope for the best, because it's like you get like a 3-minute sample and then you hope they sound like your character. So I love them and I love listening to audio. So
Yeah, we get a couple to listen to and make our choice. And the reader, audio has just become so big over the years, and readers really love it. I swear I have more readers at the U.S. Post Office. They are not sorting mail. They are listening to audiobooks. I guarantee it.
We did have one unusual circumstance. Someone actually mailed a question in for this event before. This has never happened. I wrote it down because I wanted to be sure. Now, this person did not sign their question. The only clue I have is that it came from Seattle, someplace in
Oh
Washington.
boy, I know something's coming.
And the question is specifically for Susan. It's like, what has working with literary legends like Christina Dodd and Jane Ann Krentz taught you as a writer?
I wonder who that was.
Wonder who sent that in. I'm humbled, okay? I'm freaking humbled.
There we
Good
go.
answer. Good answer.
Last chance for questions before we... Ready? One in the front.
So you've mentioned that you're both pantsers. Have you ever written a scene that just totally surprised you? And can you think of one offhand that surprised you the most, or was the most?
I can think, for sure. It had to be you. Early in the book, the hero, who's the coach for the Chicago Stars, stops at a 7-Eleven and picks up a 16-year-old girl. And you were like, holy cow. Now, in the back of my mind, I kind of knew what I was doing. But, and it's like, is your daddy home? Well, we'll go to your house. I mean, it's so icky. And I'm writing this, I'm thinking, I guess I can push this a little farther, a little farther, a little farther. And I keep pushing and I keep pushing and keep pushing until they're going at it in Daddy's house. And the voicemail goes off and it's a message, and we realize that this is his ex-wife and they're playing a little game. And she's not teenage. But what happened with that is some of the readers didn't read it all the way through. And they were going online and saying, this is sick, this is twisted. And the other readers are going, keep reading, keep reading, keep reading. And it's actually the end of their relationship, because he does not want to play games like this anymore. And she does. But it was walking a dangerous tightrope with that scene, and I loved it. That was so much fun to try to pull that off. Twisted, but fun.
I remember that one, and I remember having that.
What is she doing?
Oh my God. For me, I can't really, because I write murders. So I think the most surprising thing for me is when I kind of run out of steam, I'll just kill somebody else. So.
What a nice person she is.
Patrick, you had another question?
When in doubt, kill somebody.
Yeah, pretty much. Page count.
Okay, this is a very suspicious message which just came in. It said, asking for a friend in Seattle.
Can't they just go back and write?
SEP, what sport do you play? Jen, what cupcakes do you make?
I got called out.
Well, this is from either Christina Dodd or Jane Ann Krentz, and they are saying this because they know I play no sports at all. If you don't need to wear mascara to do it, I am not interested.
I love that.
You actually bake, though.
I do. And John Charles and I share recipes. I have a standard vanilla and chocolate, but I play volleyball.
Well, goody for you.
And I skateboard.
Before we conclude, I do have one question for you, Susan. Now that Gothics are all the rage again, I loved Heroes Are My Weakness. Can we expect
Another
something from you.
Gothic. Heroes of My Weakness was a standalone book, and I was raised on those Gothic romances of Phyllis Whitney and Victoria Holt, and they always had the mysterious house on the hill and the heroine running away in her negligee, and there was always a cave and the tide coming in. And so I did a modern take on that, but included all those elements, like she's running from the house on the hill and she's wearing her bunny pajamas and things like that. That was really, really fun. The problem with that, though, John, is it only was really the older readers who got all of the who had read all of those books, who got what was going on.
Good answer. Okay, if there's no other questions, we're going to go ahead and, Patrick, do you want to turn us off virtually? And we do have some things to give out. So PK, what number are we at? 27. Let me get the awards. And Susan, if you'd pick, I guess I should say goodbye to everybody virtually. Thank you for joining us. God, Susan's a